good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much for coming, and online people also. Now, to introduce tonight's speaker, Louise Luxemburg, quite a few of you will know Louise. She is a writer, historian, and for many years a convener for Brilsey History and Culture Group, speaking frequently at the Institute on literary and historical subjects. Louise studied graphic design in London, English and cultural studies at Warwick University, working in several London publishing houses before becoming a freelance designer, writer, and historian. Now, tonight, we have a real treat in store for us, for Louise has extensively researched the life of this dashing and charismatic Robert Dudley, the illegitimate son of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, the great favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. This is the 5th talk in our 10-month programme, The Renaissance Journeys of Discovery. These 36 talks will explore the history, legacy, and future relevance of the Renaissance. Journeys of discovery that send us through 3 pivotal centuries across diverse cultural disciplines and several continents. Art, astronomy, exploration, history, invention, literature, philosophy, politics, science, and world affairs. They will all be covered. More details can be found on our website, brilsey.org/renaissance, where you will certainly find something of interest for everyone. We also have the little Renaissance leaflets that you can take one of before you leave. Now, our Robert Dudley, explorer, inventor, cartographer, skilled in philosophy, chemistry, physics, and perfectly acquainted with all branches of mathematics, could be thought of as a real Renaissance man. I give you Louise.
Thank you, Zoe. Can you all hear me? Good. Right. Where's my little thing? When I was living in Warwickshire 25 years ago, I was asked as a Millennium Project by the trustees of the Lady Leveson Foundation at Temple Borsal to find out more about their elusive benefactress, who in her will of 1673 had given instructions for the erection of a hospital or almshouse and for the minister to teach and instruct in learning 20 of the poorest boys of the inhabitants of Borsal parish. Lady Catherine Leveson, I discovered, was the daughter of Sir Robert Dudley, son of the Earl of Leicester, and the more I uncovered about her father, the more fascinated I became. Some have said he was the most gifted and talented of all the Dudleys, while others, I suspect, have never heard of him. For many years now, I have felt that he deserves to be better known, so this talk is my little way to introduce him to you. We will begin by going back 100 years to when Catherine Leveson's grandfather, Robert Dudley, the dashing Earl of Leicester, was 41 years old and in his prime. He had been Queen Elizabeth I's uncrowned consort since she had come to the throne. In May 1573, the court correspondent observed, "There are 2 sisters now in the court that are very far in love with the Earl of Leicester, as they have long been, my Lady Sheffield and Frances Howard. They, of like striving who will love him better, are at great wars together, and the Queen thinketh not well of them, and not the better of him." By now, the affair between Leicester and the widowed Lady Douglas Sheffield was well established, and it is his only recorded affair since the death of his wife, Amy Robstart, 13 years earlier. Amongst Leicester's papers, there survives an undated letter that he wrote to Lady Sheffield, advising her to break off the affair. He explained that he couldn't marry her, not even to beget a Dudley heir, without his utter overthrow, meaning the Queen's favour. In the letter, Leicester says he still loves her, but offers her help to find another husband for reasons of respectability, if she so wishes. However, the affair continued, and the following year, Lady Douglas gave birth to a son, whom Leicester acknowledged as his own. Robert Dudley was born at Sheen, Richmond, on the 7th of August, 1574. Leicester was 41, Douglas was 31. Robert's legitimacy has long been debated. His mother believed that they went through a marriage ceremony in the presence of witnesses, but Leicester always denied it. The following year, however, when Leicester staged his 19-day spectacular at Kenilworth Castle in July 1575, the affair was waning, and it's doubtful if Lady Douglas was present. The whole setting of Kenilworth, the landscape, lake, castles, and Renaissance garden was ingeniously transformed into a theatrical extravaganza with fireworks, masks, hunts, and popular entertainments like bear baiting. It was a final allegorical bid for the Queen's hand, for Sweet Robin was still Elizabeth's uncrowned consort after 16 years on the throne, and time was running out if the 42-year-old Queen was to produce an heir. If Elizabeth wouldn't marry him, then Leicester wanted leave to marry someone else. For, as he confessed in the letter to Lady Douglas, there is nothing in the world next to the Queen's favour that I would not give to be in hope of leaving some children behind me, now being the last of our house. Among the guests at Kenilworth was Letitia Knowles, whose husband, Walter Devereux, Earl of Essex, was fighting in Ireland. Soon after the Kenilworth spectacular, rumours began to circulate about Leicester and Letitia, which reached the ears of the Earl of Essex. He was in Dublin when certain letters, whose origin remains a mystery, prompted his immediate return to court. But his departure was delayed, for, as he wrote, "A disease overtook me, which maketh me suspect of some evil received in my drink, for ever since I have been troubled with a flux and vomits." Essex died 3 weeks later, on the 21st of August, 1576. A post-mortem concluded that he'd died of natural causes, but rumours circulated that he'd been poisoned at the behest of the Earl of Leicester. Such was his reputation. Nearly 30 years later, Lady Douglas claimed that Leicester tried to end their relationship before his marriage to the widowed Countess of Essex. They had a meeting in the garden at Greenwich, where Leicester asked her to disavow the marriage, offering her £700 a year. When she rejected the offer, Leicester threatened to leave her penniless. Upon reflection, Lady Douglas accepted the offer. In the spring of 1578, Leicester underwent a secret marriage ceremony with Letitia Knowles. Bigamy at that time was not a crime under English civil law, although it was contrary to ecclesiastical law. Letitia, Countess of Essex, married the Earl of Leicester on the 21st of September, 1578. The event took quietly at Leicester's home of Wanstead, so that Elizabeth wouldn't hear of it. His brother Ambrose, Earl of Warwick, the Earl of Pembroke, and Lord North were witnesses. Leicester, a widower for 17 years, had confessed to Lord North that for many years he had hoped to marry Elizabeth herself, for whose sake he had hitherto foregone marriage. When the Queen heard of the marriage 2 months later, she banished Letitia permanently from court. She never forgave her cousin, nor accepted the marriage. Letitia, with her flame-red hair, looked rather like the Queen, but was more beautiful and 11 years younger. Letitia's mother was the Queen's principal lady-in-waiting, but the Queen's fondness for her mother did not extend to Letitia. Elizabeth was consumed with jealousy, and Letitia never returned to court. In November 1579, Lady Douglas, the unacknowledged wife, married Sir Edward Stafford of Grafton. She accompanied her husband to Paris, where he served as ambassador to the court of Henry III of France. There she became a prominent society figure and friend of the Dowager Queen Catherine de' Medici. Leicester kept a portrait of Lady Douglas in his country home, Wanstead, until his death. And during his earliest years, the child, Robert Dudley, lived with his mother. But when she remarried, he was given up to his father's charge. To Leicester and Letitia's great joy, their son, Robert, Lord Denbigh, was born in June 1581. He was immediately heir to the earldoms of Leicester and Warwick, and was fondly known as the noble imp. A tiny suit of armor made for him is on display at Warwick Castle. By 1583, Leicester's 9-year-old base son, as he called Robert Dudley, was with a private tutor at Offingham, near Worthing in Sussex, under the charge of his uncle Ambrose, Earl of Warwick, who had a residence in or near Worthing. Leicester seems to have been a conscientious father and visited his son on occasions. In his accounts is recorded £30 given to the schoolmaster who taught Mr. Robert Dudley, and whilst on the same visit to see his son, Leicester gave the schoolmaster a 10-shilling tip. Young Robert probably spent most of his time in Sussex. On one occasion, the boy was given a hat. On another, a gilt rapier and dagger with a velvet scabbard. Then came a crushing blow. Leicester's 3-year-old son, Lord Denbigh, died suddenly on the 19th of July, 1584. His untimely death shattered the dynastic hopes of the House of Dudley. His little tomb now rests in the corner of the Beauchamp Chapel in the Collegiate Church of St. Mary, Warwick. Heartbroken at losing his heir, Leicester now groomed his stepson, Robert, 2nd Earl of Essex, to take his place at court. At first, Essex was reluctant to give up his country life. His studies at Cambridge had made him enjoy the company of scholars. But following Leicester's appointment to command the army going to the Netherlands, Essex accompanied his stepfather to war. The following year, Essex participated in Leicester's capture of Doesburg and in the famous skirmish at Zutphen, where he and a small body of horsemen repeatedly charged a much larger Spanish force with foolhardy bravery. Essex was later dubbed a Knight Banneret by Leicester for his courage. By 1587, Essex had replaced Sir Walter Raleigh to become a favourite of the Queen, much to Leicester's satisfaction. Leicester built upon Essex's ascendancy by successfully negotiating with Elizabeth to become Lord Steward on condition that his office as Master of Horse would pass to Essex. By now, young Robert was at the University of Oxford. The following year, his name appears in the book of Christ Church College with the title Comitis Filius, meaning son of an earl. One of his tutors was Thomas Challoner, with whom he kept up a lifelong correspondence, and more of him later. In 1588, the threat of invasion by Spain's Armada was very real, and Leicester, who was in charge of the Queen's land forces, was camped at Tilbury to defend the Thames estuary against any incursion upriver to London. Essex was appointed overall commander of the horse in Leicester's army, and Leicester took his 14-year-old son Robert with him. On the 8th of August, Elizabeth paid her legendary visit to Tilbury. She dined with Leicester and Essex and their officers. Young Robert later claimed, with some exaggeration perhaps, that he was a colonel under his father, the Earl of Leicester, at Tilbury, so perhaps he too dined with the Queen. The next day, Elizabeth, in her shimmering silver breastplate, gave her rousing speech, which, as we all know, ends, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too, and think foul scorn that Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm." As she rode through the cheering crowds on her white horse, flanked by the Earl of Leicester and the dashing Earl of Essex, young Robert must have felt immensely proud to be part of this momentous event. By the end of August, when the threat of invasion had passed, the Queen returned to London and preparations began for a triumphal Thanksgiving at St. Paul's. Leicester retired to the country for a rest. At Tilbury, he had picked up camp fever, a form of malaria. The death on the 4th of September, 1588, of the Earl of Leicester was entirely unexpected. Elizabeth was distraught and locked herself up in her apartment until Lord Burleigh had the door forced open. She kept the letter he had sent 6 days earlier, before his death, in her treasure box, inscribing it his last letter. It was with her when she died 15 years later. Leicester is buried in the Beauchamp Chapel, St. Mary's, Warwick, where his illustrious ancestor, Richard Beauchamp, and his little son are buried. The following year, Letitia married Sir Christopher Blount and lived for another 45 years. But when she died, she asked to be buried alongside the best and dearest of husbands, as the epitaph which she commissioned records. In his will, most of Leicester's estates, including Kenilworth and the manor of Temple Borsal, and his debts passed to his brother, Ambrose Dudley, Earl of Warwick, which encumbered him for his remaining lifetime. Warwick also took responsibility for 14-year-old Robert, his base son, as he was named in Leicester's will, and to whom Leicester had willed to inherit after Warwick's death. Despite 3 marriages, Ambrose Dudley, known as the Good Earl of Warwick, had no living children. A leg injury sustained 27 years earlier in France, when assisting the Huguenots in the First French War of Religion, troubled him for the rest of his life. In January 1590, Ambrose finally agreed to have his gangrenous leg amputated, and as a result, died the following month. The Earl of Warwick is buried in St. Mary's, Warwick, close to his brother Robert and his little nephew, the noble imp. Though the Dudleys' legitimate line had come to an end, perhaps as compensation, these monuments proudly boast of their distinguished heritage, with a proliferation of coats of arms around the tombs. On his uncle's death, 17 months after his father's, 16-year-old Robert Dudley came into possession of Kenilworth and the other estates left to him by his father's will, but not the titles and the financial perks that went with the titles that his father had enjoyed. Young Robert Dudley now took his place at court, and in 1591 he was temporarily barred for kissing a young maid of honor in public, but it soon turned out that he was married to her. He was only 19 at the time. His choice of wife was fortuitous, for Margaret Cavendish brought with her some interesting maritime connections. And these connections, as well as his own family connections, his mother's brother, Charles Howard, was the famous Lord High Admiral who had seen off the Spanish Armada, seemed to have stimulated his fascination in maritime affairs, and he readily backed Cavendish's circumnavigation voyage of 1591, which included his father's old ship, the galleon Leicester. Dudley began to purchase scientific nautical instruments made by the leading craftsmen of the day, and Whitwell's lunar compass is the most complex instrument made during the 16th century. While Dudley was preparing a circumnavigation voyage that he intended to command himself, plague raged across the country. In 1592, it killed an estimated 15,000 people in London alone. Frustratingly, the Queen refused permission for his circumnavigation voyage, as she considered him too inexperienced, but she did sanction his venture to the West Indies. At this stage, Dudley seems to have been coordinating a venture to Guyana, South America, with Sir Walter Raleigh, in search of El Dorado, the land of gold. Dudley and his 3 ships made for the Canaries and crossed the Atlantic to Trinidad. When Dudley arrived, he was surprised to find Raleigh not there. They had left Southampton together and had planned to meet at Port Curiapan, Trinidad. Speaking by signs to the friendly natives, Dudley gathered that no one in a big canoe and a white face had passed that way. Dudley lost no time in scouring the south of the country from end to end in search of gold. He fastened a lead plaque to a tree and proclaimed, "Robert Dudley has taken possession of the land in the name of her sacred majesty," and swore with his sword to defend this claim against any knight in the whole world. Tired of waiting for Raleigh, Dudley raised anchor and sailed from Trinidad, a decision that enraged Raleigh when he arrived at Port Curiapan 10 days later. Dudley sailed to South America and made a limited exploration of the mouth of the Orinoco to see what could be discovered in the land of gold. It had in fact become an unofficial race to discover El Dorado. Dudley took some Spanish merchant prizes, sank 9 other vessels, and picked a fight with a man of war. From Puerto Rico and the Azores, he returned to court in 1595 to great acclaim. However, he dismissed the voyage as so common it was not worth recording, but it was written up by one of his captains, who painted Dudley in the most heroic terms. His journal was later published in Halkut's Principal Navigations of 1600. All this infuriated Raleigh, who quickly published an exaggerated account of his own experiences. However, Dudley's achievements were dampened by news that his wife Margaret had died of the plague while he was away. Dudley immediately set about planning the voyage to fulfill his dream of circumnavigating the globe. But instead, he was given command of one of the Queen's larger warships, Nopalera, to accompany Essex on his expedition to Cadiz on the 30th of June, 1596. This event took place during the Anglo-Spanish War, when English and Dutch troops under the Earl of Essex and a large Anglo-Dutch fleet under his uncle Howard, the Lord High Admiral, with support from the Dutch United Provinces, raided the Spanish city of Cadiz. While Sir Walter Raleigh had command of a squadron, Dudley claimed that he was admiral of the English vanguard. The Anglo-Dutch forces took the Spaniards by surprise. Unprepared, the Spaniards quickly set fire to their own fleet, anchored in the bay, to deny the raiders their prize. Undeterred, the attacking forces captured, sacked, and burned Cadiz, and took several of the city's prominent citizens hostage. Dudley later stated that in these and other diverse actions and voyages, he learnt the art of navigation and the practice of command and marine and military discipline, and he especially practiced the science of navigation by grand circles with practical longitude. Dudley was knighted on his return to Plymouth. A month later, flushed with his navigation success, 22-year-old Sir Robert Dudley married Alice, the 17-year-old daughter of his neighbour, Sir Thomas Lee of Stoneleigh, on the 6th of September, 1596. Little is known about this period of his life, but Alice was producing a child almost yearly, so far only daughters, while Dudley was trying to manage the huge Kenilworth estate with limited finances. His father had left huge debts, and there were squabbles between Dudley and his stepmother Letitia over Leicester's will. Litigation between them continued through the decade. With Essex executed as a traitor in 1601 and the death of Queen Elizabeth in 1603, Dudley now set about trying to prove himself Leicester's legitimate son, something he would not have attempted during the Queen's lifetime. The status of his birth became the leading obsession of his life and led to a tendency, perhaps understandably, of self-aggrandizement. Articles on Dudley devote many columns to this subject, I think to the detriment of his talents and achievements. So I shall touch only briefly on his attempts to prove his legitimacy. He brought a suit of defamation in the Commissary Court of Coventry and Lichfield against a citizen for calling him a bastard. But before the case began, Letitia filed a bill of complaint in Star Chamber, alleging that Dudley was seeking to defame her and threaten her possession of her jointure lands. For if his claim of legitimacy was upheld, her marriage would become a bigamist one, and Essex House and Wanstead would be rightly his. Letitia had many powerful allies, as did Robert Sidney, who regarded himself as the only legitimate heir to both Leicester and Warwick. Although Dudley's mother testified in detail of her marriage to Leicester, Lady Douglas could find no supporting evidence. Witnesses had died, and the letters from Leicester had, she claimed, been stolen. Inspired by this ongoing case, James I passed an act to restrain all persons from marriage until their former wives and former husbands be dead. So in 1604, bigamy became a crime. Judgment was delivered in May 1605 with the verdict against Dudley. It was a devastating blow. I don't know what those little lines are doing there, never mind. These years of married life were full of anxiety for Dudley. A circumnavigation voyage that he had financed some years earlier, and which he hoped would bring him fame and fortune, had been a disaster. All the ships were lost, and only one man returned alive. And the time spent at court fighting for his honor, name, and ability all took its toll. Added to this, his wife had recently given birth to their 7th daughter, Catherine, the daughter who would eventually become Lady Catherine Leveson. Late in 1604, Dudley obtained royal permission to travel to foreign parts for 3 years. He left England early the next year for the continent, accompanied by a young page who turned out to be Elizabeth Southwell, his 16-year-old cousin in disguise. In the state archives of the Uffizi, Florence, lies a great collection of dispatches from many parts of Europe, where representatives of the Medici court were posted. Florentine agents in London carefully noted everything that was going on for their Medici overlords. The Queen is much put out because a married cavalier, Sir Robert Dudley, who they say is the natural son of the Earl of Leicester, has last night carried off a maid of honor of whom he was enamored, wrote the Italian ambassador in London, partly in cipher, to the secretary of the Grand Duke of Tuscany. Strict orders were promptly given out, but at present we have heard no news. This gentleman is about 35 years of age, of exquisite stature, with a fair beard and noble appearance. The fact has created a great scandal. The maid of honor was Elizabeth Southwell, a maid of great spirit and beauty, and a goddaughter of the late Queen. Her mother, Elizabeth Howard, the third generation to serve in the Queen's Privy Council, had recently married John Stuart, Earl of Carrick. Thus, Elizabeth was well placed to make a good marriage. Instead, she risked all by running off with her cousin, Sir Robert Dudley, a married man with 7 children. A week later, the Italian ambassador wrote again. That court lady, niece of the Lord High Admiral, who they say ran off with Sir Robert Dudley, has been stopped at Calais by the governor of that city. The expedition from here arriving almost at the same time as the fugitives. But as he found that she had taken this step not for love, but with the object of entering a monastery and serving God in the true religion, I do not know whether the French will let her be brought back by force. On the contrary, it is believed they will allow her to follow out her holy inspiration. However, Elizabeth did not enter a monastery. Instead, the two spent the winter in Lyon, where they announced their conversion to Catholicism. Regarding himself a free man according to his new religion, Dudley lost no time in legitimizing his union with Elizabeth Southwell. He asked the Pope for dispensation for marrying a blood relative, quite forgetting to mention the small fact of a wife and 7 children in England. Dispensation was given, and they were duly married at Lyon. All this is told in a letter from an informant dated Rome, the 27th of January, 1607. It speaks of King James's anger at Dudley for his bigamous marriage, an assumption of the title of Earl of Warwick, and disgust at abandoning the Protestant faith. As soon as they were married, the Dudleys traveled to Florence. In Florence, Dudley wrote in French to the Grand Duke Ferdinand I, craving his protection, as he wished to enter the service of his serene excellency. He then set forth his attainments, especially in the matter of shipbuilding and nautical and military command. The Grand Duke, although delighted with his maritime talents, nevertheless asked for more information before giving Dudley entree to his court. The Florentine secretary wrote to the agent in London asking for more information. When satisfied with the answers, the Grand Duke took Dudley into his service. By 1607, Dudley was shipbuilding for his patron. In the court diary, there appears a vessel with a square sail and oars that was built from the designs of the Earl of Warwick. A galleon, also designed by Dudley for the Grand Duke, was launched at Leghorn in 1608 with the name San Giovanni Battista. After outlining the symmetry or mathematical proportions for shipbuilding, Dudley later described the galleon thus. She carried 64 great guns, was a rare and strong sailor, of great repute, and the terror of the Turks in those seas. Alone and unassisted, she captured the captain galleon of the Grand Signore, twice her size. She also, without assistance from the others, fought the Grand Duke's fleet of 48 galleys and 21 galleazzi. Dudley had not lost his yearning for exploration. That same year, he persuaded the Grand Duke to have 3 ships fitted out for an expedition to the West Indies. Robert Thornton, an Englishman who had entered the Duke's service after absconding with his English ship, was appointed captain of the Santa Lucia. The explorers spent 10 days in the Amazon Delta, but disappointingly found no gold. All this time, Dudley was corresponding with his Oxford tutor, Sir Thomas Challoner, now Chamberlain to the Prince of Wales, to keep him, and presumably the English court, abreast of all his achievements. And one of his lasting achievements was his work on the fortifications of the port and mole of Leghorn. Within a few years, largely with Dudley's influence, Leghorn, or Livorno, had risen in importance and was rapidly becoming a great commercial port where Jewish merchants and other nationals could ply their trade under the Grand Duke's protection. The Grand Duke took a great interest in Dudley. There are letters from the Tuscan court giving Lottie instructions to try and instate Dudley in the favor of King James, adding that here he is known as a worthy knight and of the utmost goodwill, and that he could not possibly entertain any idea of disloyalty or ill faith towards King James or his state. But it was in vain. In February 1608, Dudley's license to travel was formally revoked, and he was ordered to return to England. When the revocation was presented to him, Dudley refused to accept it because it didn't style him Earl of Warwick. The following year, Ferdinando I died, and his son Cosimo II, who succeeded him, turned out to be an even more important patron. About this time, Dudley began to write his first book on military and naval architecture, in which he describes a vessel he designed called Galeone Perfecta of nearly 1,200 tons. This vessel is of so much force in fight, either to offend, and of sail excellent beyond all other galleons. She can carry 90 of my demi-cannons, of great importance in a sea battle, and of so much consequence is this force, as the greatest galleon in England carrieth not 18 demi-cannons. Demi-cannons were an invention of Dudley's for use on the Tuscan galleons. His inventiveness extended to other areas. In 1610, Dudley was given a patent for a machine to improve silk weaving. Several years later, he discovered a curative power that was made public in 1620, and which appears in many English and foreign pharmacopoeias as pulvis warwiensis. Dudley was also renowned for being the first to teach a dog to sit in order to catch partridges. Dudley now initiated a series of negotiations with Henry, Prince of Wales, the son of Charles I. Dudley's old tutor, Challoner, who was now the Prince's Chamberlain, was the intermediary. One was the sale of Kenilworth to Henry. Kenilworth was valued in 1609 at £38,000. But Dudley agreed to sell Kenilworth for only £7,000, effectively buying his pardon with the difference. The sale was concluded in November 1611, but it was also made clear that Dudley needed to redeem his contempt by an act of service, and so the following year he sent Henry a scheme to make England master of the seas. This would be achieved by building a fleet of gaziabras, a warship of his own invention, smaller, but he claimed superior to the earlier Spanish galleass. Disastrously, Prince Henry died 2 days later, leaving the pardon and the balance of the sale unresolved. For his pardon, Dudley forwarded to James's favourite, the Earl of Somerset, another version of his naval construction scheme, and then his notorious tract entitled Proposition for Your Majesty's Service, contained in 2 parts. The one to secure your state and to bridle the impertinency of Parliament, the other to increase your Majesty's revenue much more than it is. Somerset supposedly showed the tract to James, but nothing more was heard of it until 1629, when a major scandal broke out after copies were discovered in circulation. The Biographica Britannica, published in the late 18th century, describes Dudley's tract as as singular and as dangerous a paper as ever fell from the pen of man. In April 1614, Dudley bought a property in the parish of San Pancrazio in Florence, where he built himself a palace on a wedge-shaped piece of ground. The truncated part of the wedge facing the Via degli Strozzi, is only about 6 foot wide. It was his townhouse until his death, and where 8 of his 12 children were born. By 1618, the Dudleys had 6 children, including his longed-for first son and heir, Cosimo, and a daughter, Maria Magdalena, who was named after her godmother, the Archduchess, wife of Cosimo II, an honor which shows how highly the Dudleys were esteemed in the Florentine court. However, his happiness was marred by a great blow struck against Dudley when he learnt that James I had granted the earldom of Warwick to Lord Rich, and Sidney was granted the earldom of Leicester. Dudley's estates were seized by the crown and granted to others. However, Dudley ignored this humiliation and continued to style himself Earl of Warwick at the Florentine court. He was still inventing. In 1618, Dudley reported on 2 new galley ships he had built at Leghorn, and of the success of his new oars, which the crews and galley slaves find a great improvement, as they are less fatiguing to use. Talking of galley slaves, here is a statue to Ferdinando I, with 4 chained slaves at the base. We might assume that the slaves were all African, but this was not the case. 3 of them have European faces. An Englishman wrote a book of his miserable experiences as a galley slave of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, entitled A True Relation of the Travails and Captivity of William Davis. This Englishman recounts how in 1698 he had sailed in a trading ship from Saltash, Cornwall. Near Tunis, his ship was attacked by 6 galleys of the Grand Duke of Tuscany. Davis was captured and taken to Leghorn, where he worked as a galley slave for nearly 9 years. Of 36 men taken with him, only 13 were alive 9 years later. Davis was only relieved as a galley slave when he was allowed, because of his sailing skills, to take part in the expedition to the West Indies that had been commissioned by Dudley. Despite Dudley's humiliation at home, his achievements in Tuscany were honored, and his star continued to rise in the Florentine court. In 1619, Dudley was appointed Grand Chamberlain to the Archduchess, Maria Magdalena. The Archduchess persuaded her brother, Emperor Ferdinand of the Holy Roman Empire, to recognize Dudley's right to the dukedom of Northumberland by inheritance from his grandfather, the title Dudley had lost through his conversion to Catholicism. And in March 1620, the emperor created Dudley a prince of the Holy Roman Empire, with the title Duke of Northumberland, a gesture that infuriated the English court. At the same time, Cosimo gave Dudley the use of Villo di Castello as a country house. When Cosimo died in February 1621, the 2 Grand Duchesses became joint regents for his 10-year-old heir, Ferdinando II, and so Dudley's place at the Medician court was assured. In 1630, the first wedding in the family took place between the Prince of Piombino and Dudley's daughter, Donna Maria, described as Princess of Northumberland, daughter of Sir Robert Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. This was a good match for Maria, whose marriage portion cannot have been large. However, this happy event was followed by 2 tragedies from which Dudley never fully recovered. His heir, Cosimo, a promising young man and a great favorite with the Grand Duke, died of plague a few days before his 21st birthday. Plague was raging through Florence at this time, and in 1630 killed 10% of the population. Elizabeth, Cosimo's mother and Dudley's beloved wife, who 3 months before had given birth to their 12th child, succumbed to the plague 2 months later. Dudley seems now to have lost the heart to continue the disputes with the country of his birth, and he transferred his rights of Leicester's jointure lands to his 4 surviving daughters by Lady Alice. In return, Dudley received 8,000 scudi from Charles I for the arrears from Kenilworth's sale. Dudley retired to the Villa di Castello to compose his magnum opus, the encyclopaedic Alcano del Mare, which he dedicated to Ferdinando II, and which he pointedly inscribed it by R. Dudley, Earl of Warwick and Leicester, sole heir to John, Duke of Northumberland. The Alcano del Mare was a monumental and totally original work. The charts, illustrations of instruments and diagrams were all meticulously engraved on high-quality copper plates, incorporating the latest, minutest detail printed on the best possible paper. The work surpassed anything that had been published before. The first volume deals with methods of calculating longitude, including those of his own invention. The second contains charts of sailing directions, and the third contains material from the earlier Directorio Marittimo, plus proposals for the creation of a navy. The fourth concerns shipbuilding and fortifications, and the fifth builds on the works of the Portuguese navigator Pedro Nunes. And the final volume is an atlas of 127 maps. The book collector recently described this as one of the greatest atlases of the world and one of the most complex ever produced. It is the first sea atlas of the whole world, the first with all the charts constructed using Metacartor's new projection, and the first to give magnetic delineation, the first to give prevailing winds and currents, and the first to expound the advantages of great circle sailing. Dudley broke completely with the contemporary style of charts. He showed lines of latitude and longitude and omitted all compass lines. 2 centuries would pass before techniques for determining longitude at sea would be improved. Dudley used the original charts of famous navigators of the time, including the notes and plans of Abraham Kendall, the master of his own flagship, in the expedition of 1594-5, as well as those of Cavendish and Henry Hudson. Dudley's last years were unhappy, embittered by a feud with his heir, Carlo, an erratic son, who caused him much anguish and despair. Dudley died at the Villa di Castello on the 6th of September, 1649, 2 years after the publication of his magnum opus. He wished to be buried with his wife, to whom he had erected a large monument in the church of San Pancrazio, Florence. But because of the feud with his son, the funeral never took place. There is no record that he was ever interned at San Pancrazio, and the monument to his wife was destroyed by Napoleon's army in 1798. Now nothing remains of his wife's tomb except a broken shield with the Dudley arms on it. There is no inscription extant. Dudley left his navigation instruments and manuscripts to his patron, Ferdinand II. 19 of his navigational instruments are on display in the Museo Galileo, Florence, and can be seen in the online museum. And these are some of the instruments in the museum. If you go online, you can see all 19 of them, and they're quite wonderful. Over a century later, travelers on the Grand Tour were made aware of this extraordinary self-exiled Englishman. Here is an extract from a letter written by the Earl of Cork, dated Pisa, November 1745. In the reign of the Grand Duke Ferdinand II, Sir Robert Dudley became famous on account of that great project which he formed of draining a vast tract of morass between Pisa and the sea, and raising Leghorn, which was then a mean and pitiful place, into a large and beautiful town, improving the haven by a mole, etc., and having engaged his Serene Highness to declare it a free port, he, by his influence and correspondence, drew many English merchants to settle and set up house there. 60 years later, after that, Tuscans were still acknowledging their debt to Roberto Dudley, Emigrato Inglesi. A pamphlet declared, he was also skilled in philosophy, chemistry, and physics, and perfectly acquainted with all branches of mathematics and the means of applying them for the service and benefit of mankind. He was not only the favorite of princes, but gained the admiration of the learned, amongst whom he held high rank. He invented several methods for improving ships and introduced new manufactures, etc., and so it goes on. And what of Dudley's first family left behind in England? Dudley lived long enough to learn, perhaps bitterly, that Charles I, after perusing the files of the Grand Chamber case, was convinced that Dudley was indeed Leicester's legitimate child, and that the verdict of 1605 had been unjust. In May 1644, Charles I created Dudley's deserted wife, Lady Alice, Duchess Dudley for life. Charles also admitted to a guilty conscience over the failure to pay Dudley the full value of Kenilworth and Lady Alice her pension. 6 years after Dudley's death, the case of his father's will was finally settled in favor of his 3 surviving daughters in England. Frances, wife of Sir Gilbert Gniverton, Anne, wife of Sir Robert Holborn, and Catherine, wife of Sir Richard Leveson. Duchess Dudley lived on at Dudley House, Westminster. She was a great benefactress and bequeathed large sums to charities on her death in 1669 at the age of 90. She is buried in the church at Stoneleigh, Warwickshire, in a tomb embellished with exquisite marble effigies of herself and her eldest daughter, Alicia, sculpted by Nicholas Stone, the king's stonemason, and they're quite beautiful. It just, you could look as if they're just a cloth draped over her. Now we return to where we started, Dudley's daughter, Lady Catherine Leveson, the last surviving child of his wife, Alice. Catherine never knew her father. He deserted when she was an infant. Yet it was Catherine who lovingly restored the tombs of her ancestors and the Beauchamp Chapel in which they lie, after they had been savagely vandalized during the Civil War. High above the magnificent tomb of her grandfather, the Earl of Leicester, is a modest plaque which states, "To ye memory of Lady Catherine, late wife of Sir Richard Leveson of Trentham, in ye county of Stafford, Knight of ye Bath, one of ye daughters and co-heirs of Sir Robert Dudley, Knight, son to Robert, Earl of Leicester, by Alice his wife, daughter of Sir Thomas Lee of Stoneleigh, Knight and Baronet, created Duchess Dudley by Charles I, in regard of her said husband leaving this realm, had yet the title of Duke conferred upon him by Ferdinand II, Emperor of Germany. Which honourable lady, taking notice of ye tombs of her noble ancestors, being much blemished under consuming time, but more by ye rude hands of impious people, were in danger of utter ruin by ye decay of this chapel, if not timely prevented, did in her lifetime give £50 for the speedy repair, and in her last will and testament bequeathed £40 per annum for its perpetual support and preservation of these monuments in their proper state. Catherine, the child whom her father had abandoned shortly after her birth, provided the only memorial to her father, and the one which mentions her father and mother as husband and wife. I see it as an act of love and admiration for the father she never knew. And this is just to show you, this is part of her legacy now, the school at Temple Borsal and the hospital for that is a woman dressed up. It was only until 1960 that they weren't. In 1960, they stopped dressing up as old ladies, you know, in these old ancient costumes. But that's one of the people, the inhabitants of the hospital or the almshouses. So, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think it goes to show how very much research you have done on that, because, you know, nobody really knew.
Well, they didn't know at Temple Borsuk. They didn't know. They didn't know who she was.
Yes.
Before we did the research.
Yes.
I mean, nowadays you have internet, but we're talking, you know, before internet and all that. So nobody really knew who she was.
And you just went back and back and back.
Yes,
until you.
Things,
yes. I'll get the microphone for people with questions. Right, who has a question? Right, if you speak into the top.
Hi, that was fascinating because, I mean, it just goes to show what life was like and what society was like in those days. But my curiosity is aroused as to how his first wife, Alice, was it?
Alice. Well, the first wife, his first wife was Margaret Cavendish, who died of the plague. And the second wife was Lady Alice, yes, of Stoneleigh, yes.
No, the one who died at an age 90.
Oh, that was Lady Alice. She died aged 90.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was his first wife, wasn't
That's
she?
his second wife.
Oh, second wife. Yeah. And his third wife was his cousin.
His third wife was the one he ran away with.
Who ran away with. So the second wife, Lady Alice, who he deserted, how did she maintain herself? Because she didn't have a title. She was only made Duchess, you know.
No, she did have a title. She came from a very prominent family, the Louise of Stoneleigh. You know,
oh, I see.
You know, she must have been supported by her family.
Oh, right.
I would imagine.
Okay.
She had money in her own right.
Right.
I think.
And also the other curiosity that I have is about if bigamy was made, what's it called, illegitimate, then what was the status of this lady, Lady Alice? I mean...
well, he was never accepted in his lifetime, was he? Because he ran away. I mean, when he changed to Catholicism, in his eyes, he was, you know, unmarried, so he could start again. Change religions.
Fascinating.
I think it happened a lot. Well, I mean, his father was up to no good, wasn't he?
Well, I suppose it was just what happened in those days. Thanks.
Any more questions? I want Margaret Cavendish. Now that is a name with resonance.
Yes.
Is this the same Margaret Cavendish? No, it can't have been. There was a very famous Margaret Cavendish in 1700 and something, perhaps?
I don't know if it was her, because she died fairly young, so I wouldn't have thought it was. But, you know, she came from the Cavendish family. So,
yes.
I mean, they were all related to the Queen. They, you know, if you look at the family tree, they're all sort of interconnected in some way or another.
I mean, it shows how much... you know, Queen Elizabeth I, the hold she had over all those guys, you know, they were having to sort of do...
secretly marry, because, you know, she...
because otherwise they would have fallen from favour.
Exactly, yes.
Am I allowed another question?
I should imagine so, yes.
So my second question is about the Cavendish family.
I don't know much about the Cavendish family.
But it's the Bath connection, because we have a Cavendish crescent here. It must have been named after some famous Cavendish.
Later, I should think. I don't know. I mean, it was a big family, and she was just one of the daughters. Right. So I expect she, you know, it's her brother or a relative. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, question back here.
What was Sir Robert Dudley's source of income once he'd moved to Italy?
Well, I think he was supported by the Florentine court. They were very proud of him and everything he did. So I think he got favors, didn't he? He got the use of this and the use of that. Yeah, I think that's where he got his money from.
Any more questions? Oh, please speak right in.
Hi there. If we're interested in learning more about him, what books or sources would you recommend?
Yes, the best book, well, it was the only book that the book there is Derek Wilson, The Uncrimed King of England, The Black Legend of the Dudleys. That's probably the best one to read. And then further up, it's an earlier version, John Temple Leader, it's the third one down. That's an old book. That John Temple Leader, I've got a lot of photographs from that one from our course, but can you see it's the third one down on that list? It's the life of Sir Robert Dudley. You can read it online.
Perfect, thank you.
Any more questions?
But if you ever go to Warwick, St Mary's in Warwick, I mean, these tombs are absolutely magnificent. You know, you don't get they're so beautiful. The tombs in which they're all buried. If I can find a picture of it, they are lovely. They all have these wonderful coats of arms, which I love heraldry. You know, you probably noticed I'm a herald. I do a lot of heraldry. But this is quite magnificent. It's just amazing. And the Dudley coat of arms, because I love heraldry, their lion has a double tail. Oh. So if you see a green lion with a double tail, you know it's Dudley. And then,
I mean, that's huge, it's sort of almost like an altar, isn't it?
It is amazing, it's quite wonderful.
Yeah.
And to think it was destroyed or vandalized in the Civil War, you know, and terrible. And that's a lovely little tomb too.
I'm just curious to know, when you did your researches, how much did you find of your sources were Italian and how much
Well, I
English?
got a lot of the Italian from that book written by Sir John Leader, whatever it is. A lot of that from
Did
there.
they all speak fluently in both languages if they lived in Livorno?
It's written in English. But I have never been to, I'd love to go to Florence to see the exhibition of all his wonderful scientific instruments in the Museum Galileo. That would be quite wonderful to see. And he's very well respected there. He's, you know, they think a lot of him. He's quite an important person in Florence.
So presumably he spoke fluent Italian.
Oh, he would have done, yes.
Or Latin or something that you understand.
Well, it says that his first letter he wrote was in French, but, you know, they all spoke French and Latin. Yes, he would have learnt Latin. He was at Oxford, wasn't he? So he would have spoken Latin. I expect, being a clever person, I expect he picked up languages quite easily, I would imagine. I mean, he wrote his book in Italian, didn't he? The big Alcano del Mare was that his big thing was written in Italian, so he was a fluent speaker of Italian.
So it was in Italian and not Latin?
No, I think it was in Italian.
Yes, because quite often they wrote in Latin so that it had a wider European audience.
But it's amazing how these people in that time, they spoke so many languages, you know. We seem to have lost the art of it, but they spoke French and not so much German, but Italian. They were all going on the Grand Tour, so, you know, they would have picked up Italian quite easily, I think.
Oh.
Do you know if both lots of his children met each other?
Did you say, I couldn't really hear, did you say, has he got any descendants? Is that what you're saying?
No. Do you know if both lots of his children, when they were all alive, met each other?
Each other? No. No, they wouldn't have met each other, no. Not at all. No, they would have been very anti each other. Oh. But it's really sad because he had 19 children. And by the third generation, there was nobody left. They'd all died out. There are no living descendants of Sir Robert, or any of the Dudleys. You think, it's amazing, isn't it? He had all those children, and none of them, no survivors. And that would have been his hope. But he died. I don't know what he died of. 3-year-old.
Well, child mortality was incredibly
and the
high,
plague,
wasn't
you see,
it?
killed off so many people, the plague. It was terrible. Plague. We don't really realize how bad the plague was across Europe, or how many people it killed. We don't take it into account, I don't think.
Right. Anybody online?
You're holding it too far away, we can't hear
you. I think I think there has been a little rise of plague somewhere in China, perhaps. But they know how to cure it now, I think. And they know what it is. In those days, they didn't know what it was, did they? They had no idea what it was or how you got it.
Does it have a name in modern medicine now?
Probably. Does anyone know? The bulbous something or other. What's the name of plague? No. Don't know.
Why pestis? Why pestis? I think that's. I don't know why I know why pestis, but I think that is the germ, the name, the whatever of it. But anyway, isn't it?
Epestris.
Yes.
Would you pronounce that? Epestris?
Epestris. But I don't know how you cure it.
No, I don't. Probably antibiotics. I don't know. But anyway, it's curable now, I think. And we know what it is. And we're, it's from rats, isn't it? Fleas on the rats.
Any more questions? Well, I think in that case, we can thank Mary Louise for a really good talk. Thank you very much indeed.